let's see, let me get my notes out. Where am I? What's going on? Oh, just some, like, I guess, just going through this, I'm sure Anne-Marie was talking about, these are the topics we're gonna go over, but some of the things to kind of notice, Brenda mentioned that we have the handbook that you guys have in digital. There will be handouts with each of the themes, and then there are the optional in-person workshops for irrigation and pruning, which will be fit between the 2 irrigation classes, and then will be at the very end, the Saturdays. And Brenda will send out like the Eventbrite kind of things for those. But those are in-person ones that are great, and I highly recommend them, especially for those 2 classes, since they, you know, you just learn so much more in person, especially for those topics. Let's see, just to break down the classes, we have 2 hours together, you know, assuming my computer doesn't shut down again. And usually we'll do like some kind of 15-minute homework review in the beginning, and then I'll try to put in a 5-minute break in the middle somewhere, and then 15-minute Q&A at the end. Like I was saying, I don't really always have time to do the chat box, but we will always have time for questions. So don't worry about that. And let's see, this week, okay, moving forward. So this week we're going to talk about the value of the value of the certificate in the garden life, and mostly just the benefits of the certificate program and overview of a native plant garden from install to maturity, and like kind of the time frame and what to expect. The handouts for today are, there's one that's about the introduction to native plants. I highly recommend you like read the handouts either right after class or right before class. They just kind of give a nice context, and they really fill out some of the things we just don't have time to go over, right? So the introduction to native plants, especially any of you guys that are real new to this, that's really helpful, just kind of like an intro. And there's also the introduction to lawn removal and alternative lawns. Really, really great, especially if you want to take advantage of the rebate programs. It kind of has a step-by-step on how to remove a lawn, depending on what kind of lawn you have, what have you. You know, so it really has the steps on that, because if we have time to go through it at some point, we can, but we don't really go into the specifics on removing the lawn, but it is it's all spelled out for you in that worksheet. And then lastly, we have a planting guide, which also is kind of step-by-step on planting, like literally planting the plant in the ground with native plants, and the watering to the watering after that as well. So that's kind of all of those are kind of your intros and really helpful and part of today's lesson. Let's see if there's anything else. I believe, yeah. So, I have to move some of these out of the way. So just going quickly over the value of the certificate program. Well, first, the program is essentially a standardized professional curriculum aimed at training landscape professionals. I know not all of you guys are, but the curriculum was written with those folks in mind. So aimed at landscape professionals that on native plant maintenance, so how to maintain these gardens. And that's so that we can foster behavior change in the industry towards more sustainable practices, right? So the content is based on best practices, input from lots of knowledgeable practitioners, and obviously from these other organizations like CNPS and Theodore Payne Foundation and LADWP, and lots of other organizations with kind of related missions. So it's the best kind of curriculum we could come up with. Well, I didn't actually come up with it, but anyway, that is out there. So some other values though would be obviously job qualification. You know, just having a credential or a certificate says you're qualified to do a job, right? So you have a certificate, you kind of have verifiable proof that you are certified for this job. Job advancement, that kind of just comes down to being able to command a higher price for your services, right? When you have a certificate that's backed by certain foundations, it you know, allows you to maybe ask for a bit more per job. Marketing, there's the marketing aspect and the like kind of signal of quality. So obviously marketing the fact that you are certified and you have a certificate as a native plant landscaper. But it also, you're kind of assuring the client that you are practicing kind of water-wise, safe and effective maintenance of their native plant garden. So it's just kind of an assurance, obviously, but also it's just, it's an important indicator, right, to customers that you are qualified and that you, you know, that you're seen by this community as being certified in this skill. But aside from those kind of economic reasons, you know, of like personal self-advancement, there's also this bigger picture to this course and the curriculum, I think, which is as well, it's just supporting California native plants and landscapes, right? And or native plants in the landscape. So supporting California native plants in the landscape and supporting change in an industry towards more sustainability. So that is kind of the bigger picture. And knowing since like as the climate changes, water becomes more scarce and, you know, price of water goes up. So people will become more interested in native plants because they'll need to fill this. They might have more demand, for native plants because they'll need to have plants that are not so demanding of water, right? But even aside from the kind of doom and gloom of like, you know, climate change, also people just in general, I've noticed, you know, are definitely more interested in native plants just, you know, as they're on their own, I think as a sense of place in their surrounding, right? You know, plants add that, especially native plants. So that kind of demand with the interest and the, you know, economic pressure is going to really create this demand for native plant landscapers. And this curriculum is trying to bridge that skills gap, you know, trying to provide folks that can maintain all those gardens that we anticipate in the future. So that there is a reason we want natives and not just water-wise plants. So many of you mentioned succulents or just kind of drought-tolerant plants. There is a reason we don't want just water-wise plants. We want natives, and that's really because what we do here in California really matters. California is really considered a biodiversity hotspot, and you can see on this map here, the cooler colors indicate, like the blues and stuff, indicate a higher number of native plant species that are endemic to that area. And that means if they're endemic, that means they don't grow anywhere else in the world. And you can see in other parts of the warmer tones, or the white actually indicates there's 0 to very little endemic species. So here in California, we have a higher number of endemic species, which is exciting and also something you want to value and conserve, or or do restoration projects to help, so that we are creating habitat essentially, because there is plenty of research that shows that wildlife prefers native plants. So maybe there's a lot of greenery in Los Angeles or in urban landscapes or in people's yards, but that doesn't mean that's providing shelter and food and resources for the wildlife, which could be anything from soil microorganisms to pollinators, beneficial insects, to all your vertebrate going forward, right? So it's not just about like, hey, there's biodiversity. It's like we're providing habitat, and having a space in your yard to provide habitat and an ecosystem for not just humans, but for every other living organism is, in my opinion, really cool. So yeah, so California native plants are really critical to the future of sustainability, but also to the future of ecologically minded gardening. Let's see, I have a note here. Oh, we kind of mentioned this, but we will talk about it next lecture. But the California friendly plants, yes, they are water-wise, but again, they don't serve this purpose of providing habitat. So planting natives does more than just save water, whereas water-wise or California-friendly plants, which typically come from different areas, that other Mediterranean regions, may be good for your water bill, but they don't provide habitat for all of our biodiverse, living organisms aside from just the plants. So there is, it is kind of like a little bit better to plant natives, if I were to say, if I were just giving my own opinion, because they do provide like food and shelter and whatnot for all the other critters. So quickly just going over this, the certificate program is the only one that exists that's exclusively focuses on California natives. So that's pretty cool. And it, like I said, improves your the marketability of certified gardeners, and it makes your resume stand out. It also provides customers with validation that you have the skills in this specialty. So we kind of just went over that. And it's backed by Theodore Payne, California Native Plant Society, U.S. Green Building Council. And these are the most respected names in native plant gardening and also green infrastructure. So having that backing, like I was saying earlier, is just kind of like a signal of quality for clients. Let's see. Okay, oh, I got to get this out of the way. There is. So yeah, you'll basically what you get to walk away with the physical thing is the actual certificate. You know, you can frame it, and then you get decals for that you can use to let potential clients recognize your training. You can put it on your work vehicle or I don't know, your skateboard or whatever. And some of the financial aspects, we will go over those, but more in depth probably in the later classes, the last class actually. But we'll kind of introduce the financial differences with native plant landscaping versus kind of your traditional turf, traditional kind of turf garden landscape. So generally, you're going to be doing fewer visits with a native plant garden, but maybe more hours. I mean, of course it depends, but it's not really this like weekly mow and blow thing, right? It's going to be a little more nuanced, and typically you might spend a little more time at the job, and you might be able to charge more also per hour for the jobs, but you might not be going every week. And yeah, we'll talk about the training and kind of the differences on like the tools and planning and whatnot and plants and stuff for the differences in terms of finance, the financial aspects of it. Oops, went a little ahead of myself. Let's see, wait, are we on, what time are we at? 5:46? I guess, yeah, let's just take the break. So even though I kind of made you force a break when my computer went out, but let's just take the break to get in the habit of it. We'll just do 5 minutes. So that looks like at 5:51. Is that correct? Yeah, at 5:51, we can resume here. I guess I can look at the chat. Or not. Oh, here it is. Are we following the workbook, Molly, you were asking? Well, so the workbook really just has like an outline, and it more or less, yeah, it follows the outline there, and then there's a space usually for like, to take notes. Sorry, I'm gonna look at what the, yeah, so yeah, we're essentially gonna start talking about the section. If you're looking at yours right now, the life of a garden, we're about to start that section. Yeah. So yeah, I try to follow it. Sometimes I'm a little off, but it'll more or less be that way. I really sped through those slides, I guess. I was nervous about my computer shutting down.
I'll be dropping the link to the Spanish class for anyone that is interested. And also as an option, if you would like to follow this program in Spanish, send me an email and I will give you the link to the Zoom, and it's Saturdays, 9 to 1 or 2 to 6.
Good reminder, yeah. Also, it's on a different schedule, right? It's like one per week. I think it's 2 classes per week, sorry.
It's two, yeah, it's Saturday for 4 hours. So, but yeah, it's the same amount of hours, only it's a longer stretch.
Got it.
But it's great for anyone that wants to expand their Spanish, and you can go in and audit, you know, just sit around. Emerson is one of the instructors. Alejandro is one of the instructors. I'll be there for support as well.
Okay, are we at, yeah, we're at 5:51. So, since I roared through the first half, I'll try to slow down here. We'll talk about now essentially kind of the life of a garden. So just kind of the time frame and how to kind of think about it. This is by no means like a prescriptive explanation for things. It's just kind of to get our feet wet, right? And to kind of like, what are we expecting here? What kind of time frames? So this is just an example. We'll kind of go year by year through one garden. Essentially, just to kind of back it up, just so we're all on the same page, a garden is essentially a collection of softscape, which are the plants, and hardscape that are put together in some kind of like, you know, logical pattern to optimize for plant health and aesthetics. So the plants are the most variable factor, obviously, and the plants that essentially there's this time period before they're established, right? For any plant, but with natives particularly, it's important, is this time of establishment. And usually that's like between 1 to 3 years, and different plants establish at different rates. And that basically means once they're mature enough they're at their full size and they have a root system that can kind of support them without as regular water. I don't want to say regular waterings, but not as much watering. So they can kind of they can live without our assistance, though our assistance helps with maintenance. I'm saying helps with aesthetics. So that being said, the first kind of couple years are really important to it's really important to give support in those early years to ensure that you have success in the later years. It's kind of like a kid or something, or any living creature, you know, the first kind of beginning phase, if you can do it like well and make sure everything's healthy and whatnot, that really kind of indicates and can indicates the future success of that plant. And if it's really not taken care of in the beginning, you really can't ensure that it will be a successful, kind of attractive, healthy plant in the future, right? So just kind of really thinking in terms of the first 3 years are kind of the most important, and that also will dictate your maintenance schedule, right? You might be doing a little bit more maintenance early on until they are established, which, like I said, is between 1 to 3 years. So this is an example that we're going to go through. Oh, but before, if you are going to utilize the turf replacement program, the rebate, definitely want to do that, or you want to apply or research whatever before. You definitely want to apply before you rip out your lawn. It's a major part. You cannot qualify after you rip your lawn out. So just as kind of a disclaimer for folks, make sure to apply first, and then you receive a pre-approval. And once you receive a pre-approval, that's when you can start like tearing up lawn. But just because you applied doesn't mean you can start tearing up your lawn. And it can take quite a few weeks. So it's just kind of this patience moment. But anyway, good little reminder here that do the research the rebates before you remove the lawn. So let's assume this homeowner or whatever has done they've received their pre-approval for the rebate program, and obviously the lawn is all ripped out. Year one for a for a native plant garden. So install, right? We're talking about install here. We're looking at a picture of an install. Early on in the first year, you're really thinking more like weekly to semi-monthly. So like twice a week, weekly to twice a week visits of 1 to 2 hours. So you're kind of sort of frequent visits. And again, the scheduling is really, really dependent on the client's demands, their aesthetic, the size of the garden. This can really vary quite widely, but we're just kind of trying to give the idea that you will be visiting the garden more frequently in the beginning, or maybe just to say there's more maintenance early on. So yeah, that first year at install, kind of expect these weekly to twice a month visits. So some of the installation activities in year one would obviously be creating a plant list. You definitely want to know how many, what plants, that sort of thing. This helps to have this early on, not just for like purchasing and laying stuff out, but also for future references. If something dies or whatnot, you have the varieties and everything that you planted here. I'm going to skip to, well, talk about creating berms and swales, actually like evaluating runoff and potentials. I'll go back to mulch, but if you're doing any kind of rain garden or berms or swales, you really want to evaluate the runoff potential. So that's calculating how much water is really coming off the roof or the gutter or the driveway, wherever you're getting runoff, to optimize and size your rain garden or berm or swale or whatever you're using as a water catchment, if you are. So what, I lost my train of thought? Oh yeah, to optimize the size of that. And then of course, part of the installation activities would be actually creating these berms and swales. So you can see in this, well, maybe you can. In the photo on the right-hand side, there's kind of like a shallow depression, which I think is kind of like a rain garden here. And then also mulch, purchasing the appropriate amount of mulch. For the rebate program, you have to have 3 inches. Usually it's recommended 2 to 3 inches for natives. So you want to be able to, like, you want to be purchasing enough and delivering enough to cover your whole area, because they will, as you can see, the plants are quite small to start off with, so they don't have quite that much protection on the floor, on the ground. So they're very exposed, so the mulch helps with protecting the soil temp and, smothering weeds, all sorts of things. Everybody kind of, well, not everybody, but mulch is great, and I'm sure people understand that one. So anyway, year one, yeah. What this landscaper is doing here, which is watering the hole prior to planting, is like a real hot tip, great for native plants, and really ensures, like, it just kind of increases its likelihood of taking this plant. It's so that you can moisten the soil around where the plant is going to, before the plant gets planted. So it's a real great thing. It's also, like I was mentioning, in your planting guide, and like on the planting guide that's associated with this lesson, would be to water the hole prior to. So that's an important thing. Sowing wildflowers year one. Yeah, definitely at install, you might want to do that, especially if it's coming, rainy season is coming. And that's also just to have some filler, because like it's pretty bare right after installation in terms of vegetation. So sowing wildflowers at that time. I guess this wasn't said, but ideally, you want to install and plant your plants in fall, right before the rainy season, or at least within the rainy season. You don't have to. Obviously, you can outside of it, and there are some tips, and we will get into that with irrigation, but there are some tips about it even in the planting guide if you're planting outside of the rainy season or outside of the kind of cooler months. But ideally, you're going for that planting in fall. Let's see, stakes. Oh, staking, like, there isn't a stake in this 5-gallon here, but say you have like a tree and it comes with that stake from the nursery, you want to remove that. You don't want to stick that in the ground with the plant. That was for the nursery and for moving around in the nursery, and also the really fast vegetative growth that happens in the nursery, usually because they're fertilizing and whatnot. They want to keep it stable and to have a nice straight tree. But now that you're putting it in the ground, you don't want it choked up against that stake. So remove that. You can, if you're concerned about wind or you're concerned that the tree is not stable on its own, you can do this kind of double staking thing where you actually put 2 stakes outside of the root ball zone. of the plant. So, you know, some distance away from the stem, and you actually kind of loop with that green tie tape, kind of loop it loosely. And that way the tree has some flexibility and movement within, within its, you know, being kind of supported. And the idea there is you want the tree to slowly build its own strength in its stem, and not just to like rely on the stake, because actually the stake is more like, you know, when you have like a cast and you have your hand in it, it becomes all weak. Well, if you broke your hand, and you know, it's essentially kind of like that. You're just kind of restricting the movement. So actually it weakens the tree, and the tree is not capable of kind of standing on its own. So removing that stake, if there is one, is important, and even, you know, putting two on the side if it's necessary. Year one maintenance activities. So moving forward, maybe you've already installed, you are going to, the watering is going to be, you're really going to kind of be relying a little bit more on hand watering, because it is going to be more frequent waterings than any other time in the plant's life. And that's the whole kind of idea here is you're essentially like watering where the roots are. So the roots are not very, they're not beyond the root ball at this point, right? They've just been installed. And even in the first year, they're just slowly growing out. So you're kind of encouraging watering around the root ball, but also at that interface between the native soil and the root ball soil and the native soil. So that interface, like right at the root ball edge, is where you want to focus your watering, so that you're encouraging like an extensive root ball root growth. And that's part of establishing the plants. The plants, we really want them to have these extensive root systems so that they can handle and be resilient in the face of our climate, right? When there's dry summers and whatnot. We're trying to encourage that early. And the way we do that is by making sure to water thoroughly and kind of spread it out, not just like right at the plant stem. So in the beginning, the irrigation will be a little bit more frequent and less deep because the roots aren't there, but you're really kind of encouraging that, and you're kind of trying to taper off these frequent, more frequent waterings to be less frequent and just deeper. So you want these deep, ideally with natives, it's a less frequent waters, deeper watering. So at initially it's a little less that, and you're moving towards that. And that's what this whole process of establishing the plants is basically, is kind of tapering off the water and encouraging them to kind of do it themselves. So let's see, watering, weeding. Weeding is like one of the main activities during this period, year one, but also in establishing. You definitely, you want to stay on top of the weeds. And that's because weed seeds are just ever present in your soil in very large quantities. And they're basically just ready and waiting for their triggers to sprout. And their triggers are basically sunlight, soil disturbance, and water. And all of that is kind of happening. You just have a bunch of little plants that aren't really smothering. Hopefully your mulch is, but if it's not, you have quite a bit of exposure, and then you're clearly watering these new plants, and you have disturbed the soil, especially if you did like a rain garden or something. You've definitely been disturbing soil. So their triggers are all set, and you just have to really stay on top of it so that you're not letting the weeds get ahead of you in this early phase. So not letting the weeds go to seed early on is like so critical. I cannot emphasize it enough, because weeds are genetically geared to be more competitive in situations like this. So essentially they could smother your plant or shade it or whatnot and really take over the space if you don't stay on top of it. So I can't emphasize it enough to really be on top of the weeds in the first 3 years, but the first year you probably see a nice flush of weeds, of stuff coming back. Tip pinching is a pruning method. Definitely, it's very common to use it with sages or even like penstemon. And it's you basically are pinching just with your fingertips, like the kind of newer fleshy growth on a plant to encourage branching. And you want to encourage the branched form, because a lot of times from the nursery, it just comes in a pot and it's just like one stick, but you actually want more of a bush form or whatnot. So tip pinching is something you want to do early on to encourage like a nicer, I guess, not just aesthetics, but it's also healthier to have a plant with like nice kind of even broad form. So it's not just like one big heavy branch that breaks off, in 3 years or something. So yeah, tip pinching. Adjusting your smart controller. So if you are using an automated system, you really don't want to rely solely on this. You definitely want to be using your eyes, ears, and nose and all those things they tell you in kindergarten, especially early on. But adjusting it to make sure that it's not too much water or it's not too little early on, you definitely want to be kind of, we will go into irrigation. There's 2 classes on it, so nobody get too worried about it now. But essentially adjust your smart controllers. Sowing wildflowers, we already talked about that, I think. But as you can see, it's really more of a mulch garden to start. You know, there's not a lot of plant vegetation when you first install. So wildflowers really help fill the space and, you know, kind of mask all of the mulch brown. There's not a note here, but in terms of fertilizing, you don't really need to be fertilizing. It's really not suggested for native plants. Fertilizers, especially high nitrogen fertilizers, tend to, they're really just going to give you a lot of vegetative green growth on top, like leaves and stuff. And that's at the expense of the root development. And what we're really trying to do in these first few years is improve and encourage good extensive root development, right? So that these plants are healthy. So you don't want to be fertilizing with these like high nitrogen fertilizers early on, even though it's like there's this kind of impulse, especially because clients might be like, oh, that looks really bare. You want to be making sure that you're explaining why and explaining that you don't want to just fertilize to get it big and green fast because of this nature of trying to establish them healthily. So yeah, fertilizing isn't usually necessary. If you have like a really, really gnarly, poor soil situation, maybe top dressing with some like moderate top dressing with compost could work, but I really wouldn't recommend your standard kind of like synthetic fertilizers. Let's move forward. I spent a lot of time on year 1. Anyway, year 2, you're moving to these kind of semi-monthly to monthly visits. So again, you're kind of tapering off the amount of visits, but maybe they're a little bit longer. So 3 to 4 hours. There is a note here about, about cleaning and raking, right? So you're always sweeping and cleaning and raking to like make sure the mulch is still, like here you can see the mulch is actually on these mounds. So it's always going to be falling into the pathway. You can design it differently if you know about that. But anyway, that being said, cleaning up mulch and fallen leaves is always part of gardening, but you could also really encourage, like this is kind of an education moment for clients to encourage them to kind of keep the fallen leaves or even the kind of pruning trimmings, chopping, kind of cutting them up small and leaving them. That provides essentially free mulch, right? And that's going to add carbon to the soil and conserve water in the soil over time because it's just going to slowly break down and, you know, basically become the fertility program for those native plants, right? So let's see, year 2 maintenance activities. Yes, so planting, you're always potentially planting if you have some loss, you know, just you would be popping something else back in or if maybe, I don't know, they wanted a very specific variety and it wasn't available the year before or something like that. Planting, if you're planting anything out that's not in you know, that's out of line with the rest in terms of time with the rest of the garden, you have to make sure you're still treating that new planting like a newly establishing plant. So you always have to kind of, okay, if it's a new plant that's being newly watered, you have to do the kind of more frequent waterings and get it up to kind of its established phase. So sowing wildflowers, yes, you would be doing this in especially in bare areas that maybe last year they didn't reseed in those areas. You can reseed wildflowers every year. Typically they start to reseed themselves, but if you're not having that or you want more, you just charge for that, do it again each year, and you do it before the rainy season. So it's very much thinking of this seasonally, right? Wildflowers pop up after the rain. So it's not the best idea to do it in the middle of summer because there's no rain to maintain them. And they need that water and that like gentle watering to allow them to germinate, right? So sowing wildflowers you can do year to year. Pruning, you can continue with the tip pinching to kind of, again, encourage that branching form. You can start to cut back your grasses. It very much depends on the grass. There's lots of different types. There's also depends on if it's a warm season or a cool season grass. Warm season grasses look good in the warm season and cool season grasses look good in the cool season. So you typically cut them back when they don't look good. So warm season would be the cool, a warm season grass, you would clip it back in the cool season and the other way around. So typically you kind of just do that once. It really, again, really depends on the grass. We will get into that in the pruning lecture, but just as a general, you might be doing that. Shearing and hedging you might be starting to do to kind of keep, if you have something that's like a screen and you want it, you have a plant that you want to have that hedge form or that screen, screening feature, you would start to shear it so that it has that new growth that fills in and provides that. Watering, yeah, you're kind of always checking irrigation. I feel like that's just part of maintenance in general. Any one of you guys that are landscape professionals will know that. It's, you're always looking for leaks or running it to make sure that it works. You should at least do it annually, make sure everything's running the way you think it should, and all the hydro zones are working and watering things appropriately. And again, adjust your smart controller. This would be year 2, you're slowly kind of, again, watering a little less. The first summer, so I guess going back, but the first summer is really important that you still water, but again, try to like get this balance of less frequent but deep waterings, but you will in the first summer kind of need to water them because they're not quite used to it yet. Second year, you're tapering it off even more. You're reducing your irrigation frequency that second summer, but making sure to apply enough water to like basically wet the top 18 inches. It's a deep watering. You want the whole root zone to be watered. So you would adjust your smart controller appropriately. And also, you really want to make sure when you're watering, I mean, this goes at any time, any year, but like that you're appropriately watering it. You're not just setting it and walking away. If you have a clayey soil that's not absorbing that water and there's a lot of runoff, you're not effectively watering your plants, So making sure you're not creating runoff when you're watering, that's one of the things when you're checking irrigation, like make sure the full run time, all the water stays in the ground. It's not running off into pathways or onto the driveway or something like that. That's part of checking, right? Let's see, let's see if I have any more notes here about the second year. I wonder if I have another slide. Oh yeah, year 2. Yeah, still replanting if there's something that's possibly died. I think, no, yeah, I mean, that's kind of like what I said before. Weeding, you still want to stay on top of, again, really critical year 1 and 2, just be on top of it. Don't let the weeds develop that seed head. Don't let them go to seed. If you don't have time, just at least like weed whack it down to the ground so that, at least it's not producing more seed. Because that, again, like I said, I mean, I can't emphasize it enough. So here we have culling non-thriving plants. Usually by year 2, if something's like really has not changed in size, you'll be able to tell, you know what I mean? But I sometimes actually wait till year 3, but I don't know, maybe I'm lazy. But either way, you can cull non-thriving plants at year 2, maybe late year 2. Remulching, you shouldn't need to remulch a garden regularly. If perhaps year 2, you'll know, like say there's some erosion or the sprinklers are spraying off a bunch of it, or it's, a lot of high traffic area, you'll be able to tell year 2, like, oh, wow, we're losing mulch in these areas. And obviously you can remulch those areas if it's necessary. But you really, once the plants have a large enough coverage and they're shading the soil and they're creating their own mulch, kind of their own leaf droppings and litter, you really don't need to be adding or remulching a landscape on the regular. This is just when they're small and there's a lot of exposed soil early on, right? Year 2, staking. Oh, the stake, like I was talking about, maybe at this point you can remove it completely if it's not necessary. See how rigid and strong your tree feels, and looks. But you should definitely revisit the stake. So don't just leave it there. That happens so often. People just leave the stake and then it's there forever and it's just sitting there. So make sure to revisit that stake if you have it and either adjust it accordingly, like either make it looser or move it down to just 1 or remove it completely. But definitely revisit it and make sure you're noting whether or not it's necessary or if it needs to be loosened somewhat. You really want the tree to have some movement and flexibility in it, but just have some the support if there were maybe like a really high wind event or something like that, or if it's leaning, or you know what I mean? This is kind of how you're just supporting it. You're not really trying to hold it up completely, right? Year 2, basically every year moving forward, you will be doing your cleaning your rain swales or rain gardens, or before the rainy season. I do this like kind of water capturing strategies. I do this very often with my work, and have done a lot of installs in Los Angeles with these rain gardens. I really always recommend folks to do it right before the rain. And you know, this is just essentially checking the inlet or the outlets of any rain garden or swale, just making sure there's not something blocking it, and or you know, that's something that's going to kind of impede the flow of water. So just checking that everything kind of works and runs, and if it's coming from the gutter, making sure that, you know, everything, you can even throw the hose up on the roof and make sure that, you know, it goes down the gutter and actually works the way you would anticipate it to work. So there is also, you guys have a sheet in, oh, I don't remember what class it is now. I think it is in the irrigation class, but in your handout, there's a rain garden handout on calculating runoffs and also kind of installing a rain garden. Wait a second, did I? Oh, I was gonna say it with the kind of culling non-thriving plants. Well, I guess that will happen here in year 3 as well, but you really want to, well, let's just, yeah, I'll mention it in the next slide. But moving to year 3, you are talking, again, you're kind of still sticking with the semi-monthly to monthly visits. You maybe are doing even fewer, or maybe staying with the same, and they're usually like 3 to 4 hours. Again, this is very dependent on the client. This is not like, you don't need to like write this down and be like, oh, I have to go twice a week, 3 to 4 hours. You know, this is just an example. But generally speaking, as the garden matures, the nature of the maintenance becomes more seasonal. And that means like, you're not necessarily having to hand water these like little fragile newbie plants. You're really just focusing on, okay, we got a lot of pruning to do, and you know that these plants have, you know, the onset of all these flower stalks, so in 3 months you're going to have to cut them back or something like that. So you really start to have a more seasonal feel with the garden as they start to mature. Oh, I guess, yeah, it said regular maintenance. Oh, right. So, right, you might have a regular maintenance of your seasonal kind of thing, but it might be interrupted by these like large pulses. So especially if you're maybe replanting stuff, you will have to, well, maybe not replanting is not the best example, but perhaps like rain, you know, rainy, you know, after the rain, they have a bunch of weeds that have popped up, and you just kind of have a crew and do like, you know, a day of weeding or 2 days of weeding, or even pruning. You know, you might have a garden that needs quite a bit of pruning, and that's something that's just like an interruption where you have in your maintenance schedule of, you know, more visits than the average, right? Just for a particular situation. Year 3 activities are remulching, right? Remulching, as we talked about, you really shouldn't need to be doing at this point, but it would be clear if you needed something. It's not really necessary. Usually by year 3, plants are starting to take on their full form. You guys may have heard this, like, I don't know, saying or whatever, that's first year sleep, second year creep, third year leap. And this is what they use for native plants. And all native plants kind of, what's it called, like establish at different times. Not all of them leap the third year, some leap on the first year, but essentially the idea behind this first year sleep, second year creep, third year leap is that remembering it's not really until the third year that you will see the garden really take its mature shape. And with that, you'll usually see issues that you maybe didn't have before or didn't see before, one of them majorly being overplanting. And that's really common. I see it all the time. In fact, I hear it a lot because, you know, you kind of get over eager when it's just this bare space and plant a bunch of stuff and you really want it to look full. But by year 3, everything's really crowded. So year 3, you might be either doing a lot of pruning to adjust for that, you know, like, or pruning, you know, things that are like in the pathways or something like that, or just straight up pulling overgrown plants. You know, if you have, you know, a lot, like 30% more plants than you need in this space, and it's just looking really hectic, you might just have to selectively pull ones that are too big or too unruly for the space. So yeah, it's really common. I would say overgrown or like overplanting is like, I would say at least top 5 issue with garden maintenance that I see at least. Let's see. Oh yeah, so let me see if the next one. Yeah, again, yeah, so cleaning the rain swales, you're doing that annually. Replanting, so by year 3, if you're needing to replant something, you really want to consider why the plant died, if it's dying at that point, or if it, maybe you're having the same varietals die on you. Don't just plant like for like necessarily, because you want to investigate, like if it's, for example, if it's like I don't know, a bicycle tire ran over it, or like a raccoon destroyed it, or a misaligned sprinkler, okay, that makes sense. But if you're seeing like something kind of repeatedly happening, maybe it's the plant that doesn't want to be there. So I know Theodore Payne pushes this a lot, but in general with native plants, you really want to choose the right plant for the right place. And hopefully I will be like repeating that refrain the whole course. But if I don't, you guys should in your minds, which is just really choosing the right plant for the right place, not trying to put a plant that doesn't want to be in that space and trying to accommodate like an uncomfortable plant. It's like, it's never going to thrive. It's never going to be happy. So that would be something like maybe a plant that really wants a lot of good drainage, like a cactus species or something, to go extreme. But it's in a place with like a lot of water and clay or standing water. You know what I'm saying? What I mean? It's like, you really want to be choosing the appropriate plant. You don't have to be like, oh, I have clay, I can't, there's nothing I can plant here. There's plenty of options. It's just planting the appropriate plant, because that really helps you in terms of maintenance. That really decreases the amount of maintenance you have to do if you're choosing the appropriate plant for the appropriate site. Weeding. So yeah, replanting, think about why something's passed away or died, and maybe choose something alternate if it makes sense. Weeding should start to be a little less of a time-consuming activity at this point. You should probably be doing less of it, and it's more like spot treatments, maybe some stubborn like Bermuda grass that keeps coming back. You'll start to have this kind of more spot treatment weeding style. Water, again, you're at this point, things should start to be being at the established phase, and so you should really be getting the watering down to the absolute minimum that they need. So again, you want to be achieving these deep waterings and infrequent and deep waterings for natives, but at this point they should be able to kind of like withstand a significant periods of time without water, and that is dependent on types of plants. We will get into that in the later classes. But anyway, checking your irrigation, obviously you're always checking irrigation for leaks and stuff that breaks, and adjusting the hydro zone or the different zones. It's, again, I can't emphasize irrigation enough in terms of checking it frequently. Year 4, so at year 4, probably still with the semi-monthly to monthly visits, maybe 3 to 4 hours, or just as the client requires or requests. Sometimes people just want like a quarterly visit, and they're going to do the rest. Or at this point, the garden is more established, and the visits will be very much, you'll kind of know the drill in terms of each garden, like what its needs are. And most of your activities are going to be essentially just pruning and monitoring the garden. Also in the irrigation, of course, but that I consider monitoring the garden. But that's mostly going to be most of your activities will be pruning related, because hopefully the weeding won't be it won't be a big deal at this point, because you stayed on top of it, like I said. And the pruning will just be like whatever your annual kind of deadheading / removing, spent or like, old seed heads and whatnot, or maybe on your larger plants, like larger trees or large shrubs, you're going to start making these larger cuts and thinking in terms of pruning with like long-term planning in mind for shaping and the form of the tree. That really is more for trees and large larger shrubs. But you'll start to be thinking like that more, which is like, okay, what do I need to do to make sure this tree continues to have a nice form, if it's even necessary. Many don't even need a lot of pruning, but that's what you'll be thinking of in terms of pruning by the time the garden has matured to this point. Monitoring the garden, yes. Activities, yeah, I said weeding, you really shouldn't be, it should be much, much easier at this point. And again, probably just spot treatments. Replanting is always going to be a part of your service, and you're just going to revert back to or refer to the original planting plans or your plant list that you had on install. And just, replanting, some plants don't have a very long lifespan, so you might have to replant them every 6 years. Actually, I think in your guys is really cool. They're not there yet, but you have a maintenance guide in your workbook that I think is towards like either 7 or 6. Anyway, it's a later class, and it looks like a printed out Excel sheet. It's got a lot of information on it. It's great. I feel like that alone is super, super helpful. But on there, it has like essentially the suggested, or kind of like the lifespan of each plant. So it has a list of all the different species that are commonly used in the garden. And some are like, every 3 to 4 years, you have to replant a new one, something like small, like maybe an origeron or something like that. But others are, like an oak, you're not going to be replanting an oak. So yeah, replanting. Went on a tangent there. Watering, checking irrigation, same. You're pretty much doing, always doing that. That's kind of forever. That's a forever maintenance activity. I think here, you can also, at that point, you guys can apply for the Native Plant Garden Tour. I think you can apply earlier too, but yes, here we have a video of, this is Tim Becker, the horticultural director of Theodore Payne. And this is just a video on how to plant. You also have the planting guide, but unfortunately we can't be in person. And people in the last kind of round wanted at least like a visual, just like how to. So I guess somebody, somebody let me know if you can't hear it. You should be able to hear it.
So I've selected a well-adapted California native plant for my particular site conditions. In this case, it's Salvia Baja Blanca, which is well suited and will thrive in our well-draining soil in mixed sunlight. It's kind of a part sunlight condition. So now that I have my plant and I know where I'm going to plant it, I'm going to prepare the site. I'm going to clear any weeds away. I'm going to dig my hole, which you're going to do with a round edge shovel or whatever you're comfortable with. And you're going to want that hole to be about twice as big as the can or the plant that you're planting. So in this case, a 1 gallon plant, I'm going to dig about a 2 gallon size hole. So this soil's nice and friable, it's really loose. This part of the garden has a lot of decomposed granite. So I have my hole dug right now, and I can tell just by handling the soil that it's fairly dry. It doesn't have a lot of moisture in it. When I ball it up, it's not holding together at all, so it's fairly dry. So I'm going to want to hydrate the hole by filling my hole, again, twice as big as my gallon, with a couple gallons of water and letting that drain out. Now, this is another way to do the soil test. You would fill this hole with water and measure how long it takes to drain out. Faster it drains, the more sandy or coarse your soil is. So we have our hole dug and we've let the water drain out. Now it's time to place the plant inside the planting hole to measure your depth. Now you can backfill at this point, and you definitely want to make sure that the plant is at or slightly above the level of the soil. So I can tell here that I need to backfill. My plant's too low. So that's all right. I can take that out. Backfilling, make sure that you don't include any rocks in the bottom of your hole if you need to raise the height a little bit. So I have the right height. I'm going to pop that plant out, and I've selected a really good plant with nice, well-developed roots, not girdled. I'm going to place that plant at the base of the hole right there, and then I'm going to backfill. fill. When I get about halfway full, I like to compact down a little bit. We're pushing out the air. Again, it's all about its root to soil contact, which we want to be very high so that the plant can access water and nutrients in the soil. So again, I'm gonna pack down a bit. And now that I'm pretty much right at the level of the plant, what I'm gonna do next is build a little berm with some remaining soil. And I'm gonna leave that berm up for a couple months to maybe a year, depending.
Oops. Okay. Did I start this all up again? Okay. Yeah, just to go off of that, it is in the planting guide also, like that you have for this week. But the watering for a new plant is usually 3 to 5 gallons of water per gallon of container. So he had a 1 gallon there. So you want to be putting down at least 5 gallons, or like, 3 to 5 gallons on that first watering. And you're, again, you're just ensuring that you're watering the whole space. Let's see. Okay. What do we? Oh, right. We have some photos. This is a former participant of the Theodore Payne, the plant garden tour, native garden plant tour. This participant has photos from installation to I think 28 months, so a little over 2 years. So it doesn't go to the full 4 years. But since I've been talking so much, maybe you guys can kind of give some feedback about some of the maintenance activities to expect. I'm gonna go through some of the photos here. So here's the site, and you can see the plants are all laid out. And this is obviously an install. So maybe, you guys can unmute yourself and maybe suggest, or even in the chat if you wanna add that too, like maybe some of the maintenance activities, the installation activities that we might wanna consider for the site, based off what we're talking about.
What suggestions did you need?
Yeah, it's like suggestions for like what you might be consider for this site. Given this is the very installation site, this is the first year. What are some things you might be thinking about in terms of maintenance or activities?
Water collection.
Right. So maybe like you're talking like a rain garden or swales or something like that.
Something to keep it from runoff. Yeah.
Yeah. So right now it's totally flat. Yeah. Good point.
You could do those rain gardens right in the middle and then put a bender board, whether it be 4 inch or 6 inch, more towards the lower side so that any water runoff doesn't necessarily go onto the sidewalks, but actually stays within the borders.
Right. Yeah. And not everyone wants the turf replacement program, but that is a big key feature. Like you guys have mentioned, the rain, some kind of water capture. So really great suggestions, because here we have nothing. It's totally flat, right? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, if also the house has the rain captures on the side of the water drains, you can put those big wells and actually put a hose bib attached to them. So let's say for like, yeah, the tanks. So say like in your first years, you can actually use water from the tanks, or say if you recycle water, to actually conserve a bit of the water.
Yeah, and those tanks, the water tanks are great because the rainwater is a much higher quality water than the water you are getting from the city, like no matter how clean it is. So rainwater is, putting that on your native plants is like, just like really helps them out, because rainwater actually carries a little bit of nitrogen in it. But anyway, that being said, yeah, that's a great. Molly, I see your hands up. Did you want to unmute and talk, or are you just saying hi?
Yeah, I think at this point from the pictures, what I would be thinking about is the right plant, the right place.
Yes.
You mentioned.
Yes, good call.
Right plant, right place, and future maintenance and just placement.
That's a great point. Especially, I know for a fact, I didn't say this earlier, but this is a north-facing site here. So this yard is the north side of the house. And you can see here, all those plants are in shade. So that means in winter, many of those plants that are closer to the house are going to be sitting in shade all day long. So we really want to be sure he's not putting like, white sage or something that really likes full sun. So that's a great point. Thank you, Molly. Like the placement of the plants, like is this person choosing the appropriate plant for the appropriate site? Yeah, good point. let's move forward. Or just, sorry, I think I heard someone.
That was
um,
me, Jill. I would be thinking seriously about the irrigation since there's so much shade, but then you have that part of the yard that is actually gets sun.
Yeah, for sure. In the parkways, they're getting full blasting sun because nothing's blocking it. So yeah, definitely thinking about the irrigation. As we talked about, they're definitely going to be more frequent, and hand watering all of these guys is going to be quite a bit of work.
Well, and also the installed irrigation, like, what kind of zones they're going to have to be in.
Yes, good point. Yeah, so like different hydro zones, maybe the shaded ones are going to be on their own, and the ones out at the parkway would be, yes, good point. Thank you, Jill. Also, I would kind of chime in, I know, is that maybe sowing wildflowers, because again, it's the first, it's a early garden and initial phase, and so it's going to be pretty bare. Did anyone want to mention another point, or I'll go to the next one?
I have a question. It's Brenda.
Yeah.
Would heat coming off of the concrete be something to consider when went to plant something, the radiant heat?
Yeah, great point. Especially in our urban landscape, we're getting a lot of heat coming off of, this asphalt on the street, parkways, sidewalks, all of that stuff. Yes, is definitely adding to, it's hard to measure exactly, but of course, yeah, that's going to add to it. And like we were saying, the parkways are in pretty much full sun, and they're surrounded by concrete on at least 3 sides of an asphalt, so they've got 4 sides of hardscape. So I would think about those areas potentially evapotranspiring more, and maybe you think about watering those either more frequently or just being on a different, like Jill mentioned, a different watering schedule than the ones that are closer to the house, for sure. Great point, Brenda. Jacob raised his hand.
I live in LA City, and what you're calling the Parkway, that's also known as the island. And I'd be very careful that I know that the city of Los Angeles is providing trees, but before you would remove any plants or trees or plant anything there, I think that's city property.
Actually, the day that our rebate program, we have a representative from LADWP, and she talks about the parkway. So you guys can hammer her with those questions. But essentially, there are plants that are allowed in that space to plant without permit. Essentially, they have to be between below 3 feet and bottom. No, there's some little things, but there's a lot of options still. And but that's a good point. Jacob, you have your hand raised.
Yes, actually, comment first is the city of LA actually has a tree guide for types of trees and types of plants. The plants are pretty broad, but there is a guideline for the parkways, which are the responsibility of the adjacent property owners. Just for a comment on that one. My question is, looks like this picture, you're using decomposed granite. And in the city, we use a lot of the decomposed granite, but with the additive to harden it. So it doesn't, you step on it when it's wet and so forth. But does that additive change its permeability with rain and watering?
I have, I've had this conversation before, and I've heard, I'm by no means an expert, but what I was understood about it is that it doesn't necessarily change the permeability, sorry about that. But it's not really encouraged to use it in planting. So the DG with the hardening agent in it, usually you would use it on the pathways. And I know that this homeowner actually used it as, as a permeability factor for their garden. He wanted good drainage, and he actually brought in those 2 piles there on the left are not mulch. They are, decomposed granite without the hardening agent in it. And he didn't qualify for the rebate program. But from my understanding is it's not ideal, but I didn't get a full yes or no on the permeability. I imagine it has some effect, but it's supposedly still supposed to be able to have some drainage capacity even with that hardening agent.
Can I add on that?
Yeah, sure, please.
Pretty much on my experience, I have extensive experience with all these things. So when you do use the additive, which is pretty much a stabilizer, it does kind of affect it in the sense that it'll retain essentially the first I would say 20-30 seconds of actually watering, and after you're gonna see some runoff. You'll see the runoff, especially during rainy seasons, with your DG running off onto the sidewalks and so forth. So it does affect it, but that's kind of the main purpose of the DG in itself, you know, to be hardened and kind of create that landscape. So if you don't want to harden it, I would suggest a different solution to that, possibly mulch or anything else that may be a little more aesthetic to the client.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. Yeah, I know this homeowner chose this because his friend or the person that helped him do it, they had some kind of plan where they put in different layers of DG, I think, thinking that they would be able to capture more rainwater for permeability factors, and they didn't try the rain garden path. But yeah, let's just we'll move forward to the next photo. So this is still year one, but clearly after the rain. We see a lot of wildflowers coming up. Any activities here that you guys might note or recommend for the site at this point?
We're in terms of maintaining it.
Yes.
Well, it depends. If the client actually wants to make it a little more accessible and actually be able to be part of the landscape, I would just kind of cut off like a small walkway in between the actual plants so that you can just be invasive of just that walkway and actually have the whole plants thriving on the outsides of it. But if they like it like that, then it'd just be more so just keeping the weeds off and just letting it grow.
Right. So I think a good point is weeding, like we talked about, like that first year, keeping the weeds at bay is huge. And yeah, I guess that's absolutely a good point. You know, it really depends. Some people really want the wildness look and other people want a little more manicured look. And I think the pathway is definitely something that it's easier to address at installation, but it is an option. Like maybe they're like, oh, this is way crazier than I wanted, and I kind of want to be able to walk through it type of thing. So good point. I think someone had their hand raised. Anyway, feel free to jump in there and interrupt, guys. Any more tips?
Possibly next time around throwing in more variety of wildflowers so that because it's not exactly the poppy fields, but you know, it'd be nice to have just a variety of color.
Right.
Aesthetic sense.
Yeah, it also might be that the poppies are the only ones that really took off. Maybe he didn't water it that much, and they are a little bit more, resilient in comparison to the others. What about? I was going with like, oh, Jacob, you got your hand raised. Go for it.
Sorry, I read over the document you sent us, and the overplanting kind of kicks in, but it looks like it's heavy in certain areas and thinner in other areas. So I don't know if his initial planting didn't go well, or some areas just died off, or maybe some uneven irrigation. But it looks kind of patchwork. Yeah,
it looks a little sparse in the middle there, and that I think it's good. Like you're basically using your landscaper brain to be like, okay, there's something going on there. Either the plants the wildflowers didn't fill in and the plants aren't quite up to size yet, or like you said, maybe there's an irrigation issue happening. But yeah, definitely like piques my interest. Jose, you have your hand up. What about you?
I would ask if they want a tree,
or
like a centerpiece, because it seems like that would be a great place for a native oak.
Mm-hmm. Great point. I love that. I didn't think of that, but you're right. I guess more addressed to the design phase, but yeah, that might be a really good, it's a very flat kind of landscape with a big open space. It's a great option, at least. What about like, this is kind of, I just want to throw in there, this is a really good time and reminder to do the tip pinching, especially for those 1 gallons. You had a bunch of 1 gallons out there. You don't want to forget to do it because basically, you can only really do it in the first, well, you can't only really do it, but it really helps in those early years to get that branching going. So that would be something I would be thinking about, definitely doing the tip pinching to encourage the branching in those little 1 gallons. Anything else? What about like when these wildflowers get all dried up and crispy? What are we talking about? What are we doing there?
Remulch.
Okay, remulch. There are, potentially remulch. We know he has DG, so it might be remulching, but also when these dry up and get all crisped up, there's a maintenance activity, involved in that, which is either cutting them back. You can just cut them to the ground and leave the root, actually, because they do resprout from the same plant, even though they're considered annuals. Some of them do resprout. Yeah, but just cutting them back, and either here he has DG, so maybe he wants to keep the DG and doesn't really want leaf litter. That would be something you figure out with the client. But at some point, these will get very crispy. So there's a lot of work there to clean that up once they do crisp out. So I would be thinking like, okay, in a few months or when it gets hotter, this is going to be a lot of maintenance in terms of cleanup, you know. Anything else on this one?
I think that's it. Just more than anything,
Okay.
also just maintaining the edges of the sidewalks clear. I've noticed that most people actually like the edges clear, but the inside kind of wild. So just a
Mhm.
suggestion.
Yeah, great point. This is year, I believe this is the second year. Yes, this is the second year of the garden. So it's starting to fill out a bit. You can see the stuff kind of close to the house is getting kind of bigger. Any tips here? This is obviously not, there's wildflowers aren't there. So this is not, or not that many. So, you know, we're not right after the rainy season, but any tips? I have, yeah, the hand up for, wait, I know what yours, let me practice my names. This is Eduardo.
Yeah, just kind of
Okay,
separating
yeah.
the plants from each other. Anything that's overgrowing onto another plant, just giving it a bit of space so you can actually see each plant and let them grow, so forth.
Yeah. What
Also
about, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, also going back to the design steps, to consider what plants you're to consider the position of the plants you're placing, because you got to think about the spread. So a lot of times I think people want to plant heavily because they want it to look full and beautiful, but they don't think about later down the line how big some of these actually get. So you do start getting overcrowding, like what you have here.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, I had it in my notes, like overgrown plants, and I think that's a great point, that you're already starting to see in year 2 that it's getting crowded. So these might have a little bit more growth on them. So I'm thinking year 3, this is going to get pretty nar-nar, you know, so either planning for removal of one of these guys, or, you know, anticipating it, or if they're like, I don't want to remove it, I still want it wild, you would be doing quite a bit of pruning, either, you know, between plants or, yeah, selectively culling some, yeah. Williams, wait, I don't know your first name, but I see your hands up. I just see it on the screen.
Hi, Brandy Williams.
Oh,
Can you hear
Brandy,
me?
thank you. Okay.
Can you hear me? So when planting, I would suggest when planting California natives, it's real good to incorporate boulders. They do like boulders. And once you incorporate those within the landscape design, that does create space.
Mhm.
So that's an easy go-to option when you are designing with California native.
Great point. Yeah, I think especially because this landscape is kind of like, it's sort of like a carpet of a repeating pattern. It's a little crazy, but yeah, for design, even with the kind of wild look, I think boulders really are a nice way to create space. And they kind of call, I know a lot of people call it like a nurse rock, and you can put it near a newly planted native, and it kind of, you know, it kind of sheds whatever moisture and like kind of shades the root system a bit. So yeah, great point.
Mm-hmm.
I know this is kind of a fun factoid about this space that I think is kind of cool, because I think we typically are like, oh, the wood mulch, especially since the rebate program only allows for the wood mulch, you couldn't qualify with this DG. And I went to this site in person, and one of the coolest things about it, because of its DG only and a lot of this bare space, that I didn't appreciate in photos was because there's all this exposed space, there's a lot of native digger bees that actually burrow into this soil. There's like tons of them on this site particularly. So that kind of actually made me appreciate this landscape in a totally different way. Also, without not having the hardening agent allows for that. So this was kind of a cool feature of this garden that I didn't realize, but the heavy DG mulch option and that bare space between is actually kind of a cool ecological habitat feature of this space, just as a FYI kind of cool thing that I saw there. Let's see, I think this is, yeah, so this is the last photo. This is at 28 months. So this is 2 years and after the rainy season. So you see all the poppies are back. It's, not much older, but again, let's just, more maintenance activities or things you're starting to see, if anything new.
Definitely cut back the plants, possibly any height issues that you have with windows, but not be too invasive with the poppies and whatnot, because they do tend to be a little bit more delicate. So stepping around a little too much in there might actually affect the landscape. It's mostly trimming.
Yeah. Amanda, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I was gonna say you could thin out some of the areas where it's dense with the wildflowers just to give room for the other plants.
Right. Yeah. Also, it can be not letting them go to seed so that you start to taper off the wildflowers that were filler maybe and now more weedy, depending on, of course, the client. But yeah, good point. What about, I see there's some grass species here, like the top photo in the bottom right corner. There's, to me, got to be cool season grasses because they're green right around the time of wildflowers. So any, I don't know, Jose, you've got your hand raised.
Would you do monitoring, like IPM monitoring at this point?
You could definitely. If you're starting to see that, especially with an overcrowded garden like this, a lot of times that like limited airflow means you're starting to see, pest issues. So definitely, if you start to see stuff, and that would be a good point for sure. I would definitely be considering it in these kind of crowded areas. The grass, I was gonna say, so these are cool season grasses. They look great in the cool season, and we know it's the cool season because there's the wildflowers and they're, everything looks all green. But if that's a cool season grass, I'm anticipating I'm going to probably cut that back once it gets all scraggly in, 4 to 6 months when it gets warmer. So all these cool season grasses that I see filling in the space around, definitely considering cutting those back in the warmer season. Anything, I mean, I'm looking straight at that, like that edge of the sidewalk. There's some like, almost looks like faux rocks or something, cobblestone there. And anyone got any? Only because I said I can't emphasize it enough.
If that's the driveway, it has to be able to clear a door when you're opening it.
Oh, good
right?
point. Yeah, for sure. And those stones might be there for, maybe that's what they were, kind of like a stepping out point. But also it looks to me, I was gonna say that it looks like that's actually weeds growing in around those rocks on the edge. And especially because that's kind of where Bermuda grass and lawns come back anyway, is around the edging, especially by the driveway, sidewalks, whatever. So I would be really concerned about that. Like I would be like, get on that, because that's going to start to creep into, especially with DG, right? DG is not as good at smothering weeds. So I would really want to be, and you actually see it in the photo prior to, here. Can you guys see my cursor? If you can't, anyway, it's the same spot. You can kind of see those weeds coming in. I really think though that would be something I would be starting to pay attention to, because clearly it didn't get weeded, a couple months back. So getting on top of that, because that will be problematic. Jose, you got your hand up, or is that an old one?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think the other person has his hand up for a while though. Does he want to?
Eduardo, that was you. I thought you already had chimed in.
Sorry, yeah, I chimed in a while ago, and also I
okay.
just want to note, thank you. The picture is a bit blurry, so initially I thought that those weeds might be like possible new wildflowers that are growing. So that's just a note.
Oops. Yeah, definitely, it's a lot easier in person, of course. But
I guess
sorry,
what
Jose,
I would
did
say.
you want to? Okay.
Yeah, because you pointed at the boulders, that kind of looks like compaction. Would that be something that we'd want to address as well?
Well, like Brenda said, it's possibly, definitely potentially compaction there. And either maybe those rocks were there because somebody gets out of their car right there, or maybe there's just compaction because somebody's getting out of their car right there. But if there, typically you don't want to plant something right up against the edge because of that, because of the traffic issue. So the compaction wouldn't be as much of an issue right there if there's no plant, right? You don't want to be compacting around the root zone of the plant, but I'm kind of guessing that's weeds right there with those rocks. And I do think it's kind of what Brenda said, like somebody's getting out of their car and getting in that way. So I would almost kind of like, think more about like, how can we keep this clean, and then maybe make a little bit more obvious of like a hardscape or a flagstone or something that can be like a stepping area, so it's not so unclear, right? Anything else we can come up with? I mean, there's not like there's a right answer to this, but. But okay, we're wrapping up anyway. So homework, yay, there's homework. You're gonna take 3 pictures of native plants and send them to me. This is my email here. If you're not sure, like if you know what it is, great, add that in. If you don't know what it is, but you're like, I think it's a native plant, it'll be a good learning opportunity for all of us. And yeah, so if you think it's a native plant or you're not sure, don't worry about it. We're gonna use all the photos for the next class, which is plant ID. So I'm gonna try to put all your photos together, and we can review some of the ones you guys are seeing in the landscape also, and to include in the native plant ID class. So we all get a little bit more exposure. So try to take the best picture you can. I'm not asking you to be a photographer, but obviously it helps for identifying, but it's not crucial. And try to take native plants in the horticulture, like in a landscaping setting. Don't go out to like the mountains and take it. We want to see plants that are in gardens, because that's, this is maintenance for gardens, and seeing them in the landscape is really helpful, because we also might kind of be able to do what we just did, like other things we're seeing, not just the plant. So 3 pictures of native plants. If you know what it is and identify it, great. If not, not a big deal. And try to send it to me before Friday. I have stuff all day Friday, so I really probably won't be able to include it. If you can't get it, then just don't expect to see it. But if you can get it to me by Wednesday or Thursday, yes, that would be much better. And yeah, here's my email. Don't send it to Brenda. Send it to my email. And let's see, is there anything else? Let me make sure. Oh, we didn't really do Q&A, but like these last 5 minutes we can, or 3 minutes, we can do any Q&A for whatever you guys have questions about. Go ahead and shout them out there. I can turn on the chat as well.
Are weeds native plants?
Well, weeds like it's a really relative term, so weeds are just something you don't want in your garden, essentially. So some people consider native California poppies a weed, right? Because they don't want it in their garden. So yeah,
Gotcha.
it's an arbitrary term. Anyone else got questions, comments?
Yeah, I read somewhere some native plant likes organic mulch, while some native plant should only use inorganic mulch. Is that true?
Yeah, some plants, especially ones that want more drainage, are gonna like kind of the rockier mulches or the DG, and others that may, and usually this is again about we'll get into it, but where this plant originally comes from. If it's coming from an area, chaparral with a lot of coverage and stuff, and maybe leaf litter, or under an oak, then they maybe would prefer the wood chip mulch. So there are some preferences. But we'll talk about it a little more in the soils class, I think. But yeah, that's definitely true.
Another question I have, we talk a lot about maintenance, pruning, year 1, 2, 3, but in public project, we have a lot of times it's practically no maintenance. Nobody goes out to prune them.
Right.
And I also know in nature, California native in mountains, trails, there's probably also no maintenance. Would it still look very beautiful if we don't do any pruning or don't do any heavy maintenance?
Yeah, great point. Definitely, I think this comes down to design and also the aesthetic choice of the homeowner or the, whoever the property owner is. Yeah, obviously in nature, they don't need pruning. You might see it, maybe somebody wants that more wild look. But also in terms of aesthetics and maybe keeping pathways clear, you have a little bit more limitations and obviously or for example, the parkways, that's restricted by the city in many ways. So the pruning comes into account for things like that, the limitations of being in the urban landscape, right? And also those, for aesthetics, so like maybe somebody doesn't really like that really bushy look and they maybe want something to be more espaliered or more trained, or they really want a specific type of tree form. So that would be when the pruning is helpful. And also if there's like we were saying, many times when we plant, people are overplanting. So the pruning becomes almost necessary because stuff's like, all crunched together or grew up next to another plant all crunched up. Also, I think this is something within design. So if you, for example, like you were saying, these areas that don't get any maintenance, they kind of just get planted and then left alone, then you want to be really good about what plants you're choosing. So planting plants that don't require pruning. Many don't need very much at all, if not any, like a Dudley or something doesn't need pruning. So yeah, it's about plant choice, and that would be the same thing of planting the right plant for the right space, because in this space it's not going to be attended to, so it needs to be able to kind of handle itself. And there are many options for that. Toyons don't need much pruning in if they're just going to be like a big wildscape kind of feature.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? I'm trying to go through the chat, but if you guys shout anything out or talk amongst yourselves, whatever you want. I know we're wrapping up here at 7, but if you guys want to get.
I live in the South Bay, Los Angeles. Is anyone coming with flashcards halfway or anywhere near the harbor?
Yes.
What?
Is there a yes?
Yeah.
I was wondering
San
if I
Pedro
could.
and Wilmington.
Yeah, I'm in San Pedro.
You guys should swap in the chat, swap
Okay,
emails or
who's
something.
speaking?
Oh, this is Fernando.
Okay, Fernando. I'm Molly. So.
Hi, Molly.
Yeah, you guys swap emails or something in the chat before we shut this whole thing down.
Okay.
Hey, Molly, this is Jacob. I also live in San Pedro, so we'll connect with Fernando and you.
You're also our constituent, so you should probably have our info.
I
Oh.
work, just a heads up if anyone wants to meet in Long Beach. I actually work up in the valley by Theodore Payne Foundation. I could always grab flashcards and bring them to Long Beach if anyone wants to meet this way.
That'd be great. I think we'll have about 4 or 5 people then, right?
Yeah.
If you just want to email Brenda so that way I could email you guys or set, figure out a day to get it before Friday. But I could bring them down tomorrow.
Okay.
If that helps anyone.
Who's this?
That's
This is Amanda.
Okay.
Okay. Everybody got like emails and whatnot? Wait, Brenda, do they have each other's emails already in the, oh, okay.
No.
No, we don't share the emails unless we have permission. At the end of the class, we do, ask if they want to share emails for networking, etc.
Got it. Look at me, not respecting anyone's privacy. Well, I have nothing else, but if you guys want to keep coordinating, we can wrap it up, and we'll see you Friday for Plant ID. Oh, yeah, the flashcards, like Brenda said, definitely, I would highly recommend bringing them with you. And yeah, send me those pictures as soon as possible. And again, try to make them pictures from garden settings, not pictures from like, the mountains or whatnot.
Okay, it's 7:04.
Okay.
I dropped a few links in the chat for the free class in Spanish, for resources on TPF, and for the video link on our YouTube channel. So that